Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started. This story begins with a girl holding a bloody dagger. She didn't want to do it, but she had to. She had only one thought in her head, that she needed to escape as soon as possible. That's exactly what she did. The girl ran out onto the top deck of a ship on the open sea and realized she had nowhere else to run. She looked down. More blood was dripping from her dagger into the sea, and she realized she had no way out at all. The waves were raging around her, and if she jumped down, she would definitely die because she would be swept away somewhere, and she would simply suffocate. She knew that the man she had injured would definitely not die, for it was a foregone conclusion, but she might as well have died right there. However, the girl thought it would still be better. She wanted more than anything to avoid this terrible fate. So at that moment she walked to the very edge of the deck, and afterward plunged into the cold waters of the ocean. She would have loved to defy her fate and change everything, but unfortunately it was too late, and so 6 months had passed since that moment. At this point, this girl was Duke Claven's maid, and her name was Lorena. She sat in a cafe called the Cardinal and dreamed of meeting the main character as soon as possible. Lorena didn't know when she would show up already, but she really wanted to see her. In fact, she used to be an ordinary 27-year-old girl who lived in South Korea, and her name was Won Yuji. About 6 months ago, she had been transported into the world of a novel she had recently read. It was called Blind Beast Flower, and all this because her employer is the main male protagonist of the novella, and his name was Elon Clavan. He was the Empire's best warrior, who was a renowned swordsman. He had won every known battle, a man who was simply blessed by the heavens. He was also the bearer of the Order's famous red eyes. No doubt this guy had a lot of good titles, but now he's just called the Blind Beast. And all because 2 years ago in one of the battles, Elon was poisoned and stopped fighting for his life. However, the confrontation was growing right in his garden. It was a flower that bloomed only for 10 days, and the protagonist named Karina finds this magic flower and heals the Duke, and he falls in love with her without memory. In gratitude for her giving him his sight back, he proposes marriage to her. And Lorena's job in all of this is to let the two meet without interfering with the original plot. If everything went right, the girl could eventually return to her world. That was the thought that flashed through her mind as she was transported to this very place. But really, the thing about the novella is that she's only read the beginning and the end, and that's not good for her survival. So Lorena didn't know what her true role in this novella was, and what she would have to do in the end. In one of the romantic scenes, the heroine is embarrassed and tells him to stop, because servants are present. Then the Duke also answers Lauren to leave, so is the whole role of the girl. She is simply a servant who doesn't even have a name or further mention in the story. And now Lorena had been sitting in this coffee shop for quite some time, not realizing when Karina would come already, since the flower had bloomed a whole week ago. She didn't know what she was doing wrong, for the girl still hadn't shown up. And it wouldn't be long before he returned from his meeting with the Emperor, and her absence would be revealed. She is, after all, his only servant, so scolding him will scold her a lot. So the girl was already beginning to doubt whether she should just wait for this Karina. The master was actually still surprised that even though he had no other words, the girl still chose to stay and help. For a while longer, Lauren sat. After that, she realized she couldn't wait any longer. She decided to go inside and find out for herself. As soon as she entered the coffee shop, the owner immediately greeted her and asked her what she wanted. The girl replied that it was nothing. She was just looking for someone. She said she was looking for a young lady about her age. She had silver hair, green eyes, and she asked the gentleman if she had come to this establishment by any chance. The man, smiling, said that with looks like that she certainly wouldn't go unnoticed, and suggested that perhaps she was looking for a beautiful lady with golden hair and violet eyes like hers. Lauren laughed herself, thinking about the fact that it really does rule in a romance novel the appearance of the characters are always similar. At that moment, 2 men who were sitting nearby began to talk. One asked indignantly, "Don't they all look alike?" His partner did not understand what he was saying. Then the guy explained that she was just like the poster girl he pointed his hand at. The poster was about a girl. She had golden hair, violet eyes, and upon capture was asked to immediately report to Hodunsha Temple, and that she should not be maimed in any way. There was also a rather large reward. Before long, Lauren stood inside for a while longer and stepped out. The man wished her a good trip, and she sighed heavily, thinking that she had another day of waiting wasted again. She realized that there were only 3 days left before the flower would wilt altogether, and she was very annoyed with this horrible world of romance novels, for there was no way she could even find one person. But at that moment, the man who had been sitting at the table before came up to her and turned to Miss and asked her to stop. Lauren looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he wanted, but he in turn grabbed her hand and turned to his partner, who was standing nearby, and said that it was indeed her. The guy came up behind her and grabbed her by the shoulders. The girl immediately started pulling out and screaming, asking who they were and asking them to let her go immediately. But the men in their turn only smiled and told her to be quiet. They would not hurt her. They would just take her quietly to a temple. Lauren started screaming even louder, asking what was even going on and begging for them to let her go. But the men continued to hold her back even tighter and told her to stop kicking, because it would only make things worse. He wondered what she was even hiding, but then suddenly he felt someone's hand touch his shoulder, and he became very wary. He immediately turned his head to the side to see who it was, but he didn't even have time to do that, because that hand threw him to the ground away from the girl. He fell to the ground and looked at his abuser, asking what he was even doing. The man in turn started to come closer and closer. Then his partner asked the guy to stop. After all, they had found her first, and the reward would be theirs. Then this guy put his arm around Lauren's shoulder and said they were being very rude to the lady. However, his eyes were such a gray color that it was a little creepy how unnatural it was. At this point, the guy suddenly started laughing, and one of them asked him what he was even saying, and also called him blind, telling him to get out of the way and not to stop people from working. His friend, who was already on his feet, told the guy to leave the girl to them and get out before he got hurt. Lauren was very scared. She didn't know what to do. She was incredibly scared. She shouted to Elon, telling him to be careful, because the bald man was coming up and taking a swing at him. But the man stood perfectly still and waving his hand, said that they had even lost to the blind man, and all because he was able to get them on the ground very quickly. The girl, when she looked at all this, was very surprised. He was able to lay them down with one hand even when he was blind. Then the man looked in her direction with a blank stare and wondered if that was why Lorena had left him. The girl stood up very awkwardly and said not at all. In front of her stood her superior, Duke Elon Clavan. The man said that they were going to have tea after he returned from the palace, and she wasn't in the mansion, so he decided to go looking for her. The girl put her head down and apologized to him for that, and told him that it might be too dangerous for him to walk alone after all. But Elon sighed heavily, saying that he took it and went anyway. The girl was a little alarmed by that answer, but she didn't contradict him. They were silent for a while, and Lauren thought he was somehow too informal for a duke with his servants. Then the man turned to her and asked if she was just about to go to this cafe. Lauren immediately replied that she was absolutely right. It was called the Cardinal. And since they were already here, she suggested that he have some tea, as they were going to do earlier. The man agreed, and then she was very glad, for it was just to her advantage. She thought to herself that here was her stratagem working, and maybe they would even get to meet Karina soon. When they came in, the girl ordered tea for them. Then she turned to the Duke, asking if he would order the same tea and chocolate that she had ordered. The man who sat down across from her said he wanted exactly the same. That's right. While they waited for their tea to be brought to them, Lauren decided to ask how his visit to the palace had gone. In fact, even though she sees him every day, she still can't stop admiring his incredible beauty. The girl also thought about the fact that he was really the main character. They always make them like that. The man smiled and said that the Emperor actually had a rather urgent conversation with him. Lauren tried to listen to him carefully, but also noticed that this was the first time she was seeing him in his formal uniform. After all, he usually didn't leave the house and wore pajamas all the time. And she marveled at how elegant and handsome he looked in them. Elon suddenly said that the Emperor had told him that it was time to get married at his age. When Lauren heard that, she was surprised and coughed, asking if that was really true. The man replied that everything was absolutely correct. The emperor was very worried about the continuation of the lineage. Lauren was very worried, but tried to make her voice as nonchalant as possible, and wondered who would be his bride. The duke replied that he didn't know at all. Surely it would be someone of the emperor's choice. Then she jumped up and, slamming her hands on the table, said it was all nonsense. The man was a little surprised at this reaction of hers, and wondered why she thought it was silly. Lauren continued to yell and said it was all because he was going to spend the rest of his life with his wife, and they should have some feelings for each other. That's why she thinks he should marry someone he loves with all his heart, like Karina. Well, of course, she didn't say that last part. Elon just sat there for a while, and then, hesitating, wondered if she really felt that way. Lauren calmed down a bit and sat back down in her seat and said that of course, because a loveless marriage is a pretty sad event. She also thought about the fact that she, too, actually couldn't wait to get back to her home, so she needed to stay on track. Elon, smiling, told her to look at the whole situation herself. Who would even need him like that? Even if the emperor ordered it. A blind husband was a burden. Nothing more. Lauren, indignant, told him never to say that again, because he was sure to meet his soulmate someday. Or she could find him. The man, sighing heavily, thanked her, of course, for the offer. She said that even if now he could feel other people's eyes on him, judging him, he just didn't understand if they really came to this place just to gawk at people like him with some flaws. Then he became even sadder and said that he knew it all. I should have just sat there and sang tea in peace. The girl jumped up and said that it was actually all because she actually stood out a lot, and they were only looking in their direction because of her. The man was surprised to hear this and asked her what she meant. Lauren said that she actually had red hair, blue eyes, and dark skin, and her facial features were quite unusual. The girl also said at the end that she looked very much like the flag of South Korea, but when Elon heard that, he was very surprised and asked what she was talking about. But he also said that her look is really unusual, and it's rare to see such a thing anywhere. She said, smiling, that it was just like that. Then the man asked if he could touch. When Lauren heard that, she was very embarrassed and asked what he meant. Duke said that she did say the facial features were rather unusual, didn't she? So he was curious to check it out by touch. The girl laughed nervously and thought to herself that she had heard that when you lose your sight, your other senses are heightened, especially your sense of touch. And so now she was very worried that he would realize when he touched her that she had lied to him. However, he is her employer and a duke's, so it would be very difficult to refuse. He was staring at her so intently that she felt as if he could see. But the girl knew perfectly well that it was impossible, and assumed that he was probably just really curious. So Lauren sighed and said that he could touch her face if he wanted to. Elon in turn began to take off his glove, and as he did so, he apologized to her. He began to reach out with his hand. However, he couldn't catch it because he couldn't see it. So she took it and guided it to her cheek and told him what it was on. So he started to run his hand over her face, and the girl said it was okay. He could take it easy. But she was actually quite cold because his hand was incredibly cold. At that moment, Elon ran his fingers along her chin, almost touching her lips. But after that, he quickly removed his hand. Lauren immediately opened her eyes and looked him straight in the face. The man smiled and said that she did have unusual facial features. She was absolutely right. When she heard that, she felt too embarrassed. After all, she had lied to him and he actually believed it. Elon in turn looked away with a blank stare and wondered what the place was like in general, for it seemed to him that there were quite a few people here, for he could hear the noise. The girl was glad when she realized she could change the subject and said that the tables in this place were the same as his in the mansion, but thought about the fact that the only difference was that they were round and rather dirty. Looking to the side, Lauren also said that there were white curtains hanging on every window, but in fact they were so dirty that they hadn't been white for a long time. However, that was something she decided not to tell him. The sun was already starting to set outside, and the girl said it shone brightly through the blue clouds and formed incredibly beautiful views all around. Elon, hearing this, sighed, and said that indeed the atmosphere was marvelous, just as she described. Lauren said that it was really true, and thought to herself that she had somehow lied too much that day. But if she told him the truth, he might not like this place, and he would ask her to leave as soon as possible. Yes, and besides, this place is mostly frequented by commoners, but the girl thinks that he should definitely like this place because this is where they first met Karina. Karina is exactly the kind of girl from the village whose parents suddenly passed away. She was adopted by a noble relative and moved to the capital. During the arduous preparations for her debut ball, she wandered around the neighborhood and accidentally walked into the Cardinal Cafe, and it was there that she was attacked by bandits. And Elon, who that day is the first time he's left his mansion since losing his sight, saves Karina from these bullies. And through this they become quite good friends. And when Karina visits the Duke at the mansion, she finds a healing flower in the garden and saves the man's eyesight. Lauren thought about the fact that he really should have met her by now at this time and regained his sight with a little more than 2 more days left, and the flower would wither completely. Then the plot would definitely not go according to plan. The girl was just furious, but then suddenly Elon turned to her after a short silence and said that he had wanted to ask her something all along. Lauren inquired as to what it was, then the man looked as if to look directly at her and asked what her name meant. The girl was surprised at such a question and stammered, saying that he knew she had lost her memory. So she would like to know about it too. But she wasn't really going to explain it to him, because telling him what her name meant would make the story go on for a very long time. When the girl first entered this world, she heard voices calling her Miss and asking her to open her eyes. Soon she did so, but she could not understand where she was. Then an elderly man who was standing next to his wife said that she finally came to her senses, and he had already thought that the matter was serious, because the girl is covered in blood. Lauren didn't realize what this place was. Then the older woman said that apparently the young lady was of noble lineage, and inquired how she was feeling in general. She said she was fine and also apologized, asking if she could use their cell phone to make a call. When the elderly woman heard this, she was very surprised. She couldn't even utter the words and asked what she was even talking about. The girl's first memory after being reborn was exactly that. If she reached the right ending, she could go home. After that, Lauren started living in the place, and the first thing she did was to look for a job. The only job she got was as a maid on the Duke of Clavan's estate, and when she saw all those titles, she realized that she had indeed found herself in the novel she had been thinking about. The man who offered her the job said that since she was undocumented, this was the only option for her. He explained that everyone was running away from that blind duke as soon as possible, so she had no other job options, but it would pay well. The man gave her a pen and a piece of paper, telling her to speak her name sooner or leave without wasting his precious time. Lauren hesitated at this point, but then she did come up with her name and called it. In fact, she decided, you'd think, a typical name for a character in a romance novel. And when she arrived at the mansion, it was immediately clear that the Duke was living in hopeless despondency. He could track a target by relying on his instincts alone, so losing sight shouldn't have been such a big problem for Elon. However, as if all poisoned and blinded, he gave up the title of the strongest knight of the empire and all his other titles. Not only had his eyes lost their light, but his soul was refusing to live like this. The maids, when they went in to change his clothes or his bed or just to clean up, were always afraid. The man in turn would answer them in a very cold voice, and they, when they had done their work, would immediately run away as fast as they could. All the servants barely saw him and immediately hid as if they were meeting the monster one-on-one, and none of them ever visited his room again, ever. So when Lauren arrived, she was like a bright ray of sunshine in his darkness. She said hello, told him her name, and told him she was his new maid. Everyone ran away and hid, except this girl. For she came not only the first time, but the second and the third, and all the time she broke in with the cleaning and let the bright light into his room. One day she brought him lunch. The girl said the soup was still hot, so she decided to cool it down a little by spooning it. Lauren then handed him the soup, telling him to open his mouth because they had a great broth just made that day. The man hesitated for a while, but after that he always obeyed and did what she asked. The girl suggested that perhaps it was all because she was the only one who returned to him in peace after his cold answers, and saw his weakness and will every day. She didn't give up, despite his unwillingness to live. The man, as soon as he tasted her broth, smiled wearily and said that the soup was really wonderful, just as she had said. And just like that, step by step, Elon began to come out of his depressed state. He practiced using a special cane for the blind and even slowly began to walk after 2 years spent in bed. And so, 6 months after her assignment to Duke Calvin's estate, Elon had finally begun to lead a more or less normal life. When they got home after the coffee shop, the girl told him to get some rest, because he was probably very tired from the day. Lauren also said that she would bring him dinner very soon. The man paused at the door as soon as he entered his room and sighed heavily, thinking it was just as he had thought. He realized now that it had been foolish to expect Lauren to see him as a real man. Lauren had cleaned his office a few days before, and after some silence, she asked him if he'd ever been to Café Cardinal. The man was very surprised to hear this and said he had never even heard of such an establishment. He also wondered why she was suddenly asking about him. Lauren said it was just because it was a popular place for young people. She was silent for a while, then said that she had completely forgotten to remind him to take the reports to the local priest. And since he had assigned her this task, she immediately ran out the door, saying that she would be back very soon, having completed his errand. After that, Elon asked Bernard to come in. He was the personnel manager of the Duchy of Clavan. The man told him about the proposal Lauren had made to him. Bernard was wary, however, and said that it was usually mostly couples who met there, and it was unlikely that his lordship would want to go there. When he also inquired how he even knew about the place, but Elon, wary, said he certainly didn't need to know that. Then the manager couldn't take it anymore and started yelling at him, asking him what he even thought he was doing, and really upset him. However, Elon ignored these words from him and thanked the man for providing the information. Bernard sighed heavily and said that he apparently didn't care at all about other people's feelings. Then the gentleman asked them to stop talking about it, and he went about his work. The employee responded that since he didn't want to talk about it, he apparently would really have to talk about work, and decided to move on to this month's reports. But Elon kept thinking about this place where the maid had invited him. He didn't understand why she wanted to go to the place where lovers meet. He also suggested that maybe Lauren had invited him, because he was the one she wanted to go there with. Such a romantic place with someone like him. But now that they were back, Elon leaned against the wall and realized he'd been the ultimate idiot for suggesting such a thing. The man realized that Lauren would never love someone like him. She lives her life to the fullest, and he only makes foolish illusions and is disappointed in the end. He realized that the girl did not see him as a man at all. But that was not surprising, for after all, he was just an infirm blind man who could not even eat on his own. Soon after, Lorena called out to the master and said it was time for supper, when she heard the man's sad voice say she could come in. The girl wheeled a whole cart full of various foods into the room, and Elon in turn inquired as to what was on the menu. Lorena put a dish on the table and said she wanted him to guess, and she was definitely sure he would like these dishes. The girl tied a napkin around his neck so he wouldn't get dirty, and the man said that judging by the smell, it was sausage, so he was also smelling some interesting spices. She said excitedly that it was exactly right. They were grilled sausages, and she also told him to be careful because they were still pretty hot. Lauren brought the spoon to her mouth again before giving it to the man in order to cool it down a bit. But the girl was quite sad, because on this day, she could not see Karina again. Before that, she also wrote several letters, but all of them remained unanswered. Though Lauren actually thought about the fact that if it were her, she wouldn't have responded to such a strange invitation either. However, at that moment, she heard Elon's voice, who wiped his mouth with a napkin and asked what was bothering her so much. After all, she has already sighed heavily many times just for this day. So he asked her to tell him how he could help her. The girl immediately made a cheerful voice, saying that everything was actually fine. She also apologized, saying that she had accidentally made him worry, but it was actually in vain. She also added that it's quite personal, so she doesn't want to share. And at that moment, she started mentally scolding herself. She was thinking about her own business instead of her work. Lauren thought she was a terrible maid because she made her employer worry about her. The man was a little unsatisfied with this answer. However, he decided not to insist and said that since it was private, he would stay out of it. The girl also noticed that he had been in a pretty bad mood since they got back from the cafe, so she decided to ask what was wrong with him and why he was so upset. Elan, in turn, asked if he remembered correctly that she had wanted to go to that cafe. The girl was a little surprised at the question, but said that it was right. She wanted to go there. But he also said he didn't understand why she didn't like it there at all. The girl was distracted all the time. Lauren became very uncomfortable about it. The man was as straight as an arrow, but she said it was her first time in the capital, and she hadn't had a chance to walk around the city yet, so she kept looking around. The man, hearing this, hesitated. He didn't really believe her. However, he said that now everything was clear to him, and asked her how she liked the capital. Lauren immediately said that compared to where she'd lived before, this place was pretty different. And they even had tile sidewalks. And besides, this place has such beautiful people. Everyone she met on her way was just like a painting. Elan said he understood. Then he pushed back his chair and suggested a little walk. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked him if he was tired. But he said, smiling, that absolutely not. He was ready to do a few more laps. So soon, Lauren cleared everything off the table, and they went for a little walk after all. It was already quite dark outside, and the girl said that the moon was incredibly big and bright that day. She then turned her head to the side and said that he already had yellow flowers blooming that were the size of his palm. Without pausing, said that they only really bloom in the light of the moon, and that his mom loved that type of flower incredibly much. Lauren in turn ran up to him and said that's right, because right now the moon is just very bright and that's why they shine so well. But she herself at that moment began to look around for the very right flower to cure his eyesight, and before long she did finally find it with her gaze. It was growing in the bushes, which were quite tall, so it was hard to see. But when she looked more closely, she was glad to see that it was still fresh and had not yet begun to wilt. Lauren mentally addressed this flower and asked that it wait a few more days and not wilt in any way. The Duke, who continued on his way, said reflectively that she must have preferred silence after all, for she had been silent all this time, thinking of that beautiful flower. But the girl laughed and said that she actually just enjoys the blooming flowers in this place. There are so many of them, and when they are close together, it just looks amazing in her opinion. He put his head down and said he was very glad she liked at least something, for he was the reason she hardly ever went anywhere. The girl, hearing these words, became very indignant and said that it was all untrue and he was exaggerating. She said that she was ready to serve him faithfully for the rest of her life, because it was a great honor for her. But Elon said that because while he was gone, she ran off to go for a walk, which means she really doesn't have enough time to do her own thing. Lauren got a little embarrassed and said that certainly that was the case. However, he shouldn't think that she wasn't at all interested in working for him. She was just curious, that's all. When the girl calmed down a bit and said that Bernard had still violated her very much for such an oversight, so she didn't want to do it again. The man sighed heavily, said he understood now, and also asked if there were any other places she would like to visit. Lauren replied that he could choose what he wanted, and she would just go along for the ride. But Elon, objecting to the girl, said that he couldn't see anything anyway, so it would be better to rely on her suggestion. The girl, thinking about it, said that in that case she would like to visit the Trapple Park. He smiled and said that was fine, and they would go there the next day. When she heard that, you were very surprised. Yes, she immediately started thanking the man for the opportunity. She was really very happy. She walked forward, thinking about how everything was going beautifully. You see, this park is owned by the Count who adopted Karen, and if things work out, they can meet tomorrow. For a while he just stood there silent. Then suddenly he called out to the girl. She, stopping, looked surprised at him and asked, "Did something happen to him?" But the man said that he only now realized that he had no experience in walking with Lady Lorikoff. Hearing this, she was very surprised and asked, "Does he really mean it?" And he in turn said that there would probably be an incredible amount of people in the park. At that point, he started to move closer to her. and then holding out his hand, inquired if she wanted to practice with him now so as not to embarrass herself later. Lauren was very surprised. She wondered why he wanted to practice, since she had thought it was completely unnecessary. But Elon said he doesn't want to draw unnecessary attention to himself, so everything has to look completely natural, and that takes practice. With these words, he managed to convince the girl, so she took his hand. From the next way, they kept already close to each other. Lauren was really worried now that she understood what he meant. But their steps must be about the same length because they were walking side by side. However, because he was rather tall and long-legged, she couldn't even keep up with him, and the girl thought that the rumors really weren't lying about him having a hard time in light society. For once, the walk should be natural. So she yanked his arm and asked him to wait a bit. Elon stopped immediately and looked in her direction. She put her arm around his elbow and told him it would be better because he was taller and his strides were longer than hers. Seeing the gentleman's wary face, she wondered, is he uncomfortable? And had already begun to remove her hand. However, he put it back down and said that not at all. It was really much better that way. Lauren, smiling, said that in that case they should try again and also work out a certain walking pace to make sure no one was lagging behind. Soon they were getting very good at it, so they walked around for a few more hours. After that, they went back to the manor. The next day, Lauren met Bernardo, who had prepared a whole bag of food and supplies. She said it was a lot, and the man said that she was going for a walk and had a whole group of escorts with her. Oh, and besides, Bernard said that this was the second time his lordship was going out, which is quite an unusual occasion. Lauren, hearing this, thought about it, and said that it was indeed true. However, at that moment, the gentleman came down to them, and said that he actually wanted to go just the two of them. Bernard was very much frightened when he saw the gentleman, and asked him when he had time to sneak up at all. And he in turn said that he was leaving the mansion to him, and asked him to look after the household well. But the man, indignant, asked why this is so, since it is such a chance. He even wants to watch the gentleman relaxing in the sun too. He really didn't understand why such a great opportunity only went to Lorena, but the master, indignant, told him to shut up and not to be nasty. Then Lauren approached Bernard and asked him not to be so angry, but the man insisted and told the gentleman that it would be much more fun with company. And he in turn said he didn't want any company. He didn't want a bunch of servants following them around, and guards too. The girl, who was trying to smooth things over somehow, suggested that in that case they go their separate ways, and they would walk around together, enjoying the picnic, with the guards nearby in case something happened. Lauren at that moment also thought that this way it would be much easier for them to meet Karina. The gentleman pondered for a while, then sighed and said that he would let them go too. Bernard was immediately happy about it. Soon they were finally all assembled, and when they arrived at the right place, the Lord and Lauren sat down, and he in turn waved to the guards and Bernard to leave. The girl looked around and said that it was incredibly hot outside. Only, and despite the fact that it was spring, many people went out for a walk because the weather was good. The man leaned back and said that indeed the sun was getting pretty hot right now. Lauren asked if he wanted her to fan him, but the man politely declined. The girl started waving to herself, for it wasn't so hot, and thought about the fact that it really is an amazing day. She was actually very upset with Karina, but things would definitely get better now, at least she thought so. And the moment the girl turned her head to the side, she suddenly saw a bee flying straight toward the gentleman. This bee was quite aggressive and wanted to sting Elon right away. The girl jumped up immediately, not realizing what kind of monster it was, for the wasp was quite huge. She thought about the fact that a single sting from this beast might even make her faint. The man in turn started waving his hands, asking what that annoying fly was flying in his direction all the time. Lauren thought at that moment that he was provoking her even more, and soon the insects would be able to stand it and just sting him. And so when she saw the bee flying closer and closer, the girl jumped up and, waving it away with her fan, told him to be more careful. It hit so hard that this insect flew across almost the entire park and landed on some lady's mat. The girl exhaled in relief and said that she hadn't meant to scare him, and wondered if he had accidentally been bitten. And just as Lauren was about to get closer, she accidentally stepped over the rug and started to fall. She landed right on top of the gentleman, who was lying still on the bedspread. The girl was too embarrassed, and he in turn sat up and looked straight at her. And she apologized, saying that she had been chasing the dew away from him and had accidentally stumbled and fallen. He in turn took her by the shoulders and wondered if she was okay, and if she was whole at all. Lauren was getting a little uncomfortable with how close they were, so she immediately stood up and stepped aside and replied that she was fine. He didn't have to worry. Then she sat back in her seat and thought about the fact that this was what the male protagonist should be like, but his face was very wary. So Lorena decided to lighten the mood and suggested that they start eating. She opened the basket and said that their managers had put a lot of work into the preparation. After that, they started to eat lunch. The girl gave him a sandwich, and he said it was very uncomfortable to eat without a table. When evening came, Lorena decided to go to Harrington Manor. When the maid let her in, she said hello and introduced herself, saying she would like to speak to Lady Karina. The maid, hearing this, was very much surprised, but then she said that in that case, it would be worth waiting a little while, and went off at once to call for her. Lauren didn't know if she'd be put down by her mistress. She didn't even have her papers, and the picnic had taken much longer than she'd planned, so she'd gotten there late enough that they might just kick her out. In order to get out here, she told the man she was going to the ladies' dress store and asked that they not follow her and she would catch up with them later. Elan wanted to go with her, but she managed to persuade him to stay and thought to herself that he was a grown man, but he wanted to follow her around like a child. At that moment, some man came up to her and inquired, did she really want to see Lady Karina? Lauren immediately smiled and said that was right. The thing was, she owed her a lot, and she was sure the girl would be glad to see her. Of course, those words were lies, but the butler apologized and said that it was impossible, because Lady Karina was not in the mansion right now. When she heard that, she was very surprised and asked where she was. The man coughed and said that she was currently in the Imperial Palace, and that was indeed the case. Lady Karina stood on the terrace next to a rather handsome and noble man and said that the view was incredibly beautiful, but he complimented her and said that she was much more beautiful. The girl, turning in his direction, said that the words meant little to His Highness. The man put his hand on hers, and Karina said that he said that to all the court ladies after all, so it wasn't anything surprising already. Then he kissed her hand. It was the Crown Prince of the Xavier Empire, and said that it was really like that before. However, he asked that she not look at him, just like that. He threw these compliments casually and never thought that one day he would be saying them from an honest heart to her. Karina, embarrassed, said that it wasn't true. The man defended himself by saying that she was allowed to address him by his first name. Xavier wondered, would it not be enough to gain her trust? Karina replied that she dared not call His Highness by his name. Then the man, indignant, asked if that meant that she refused to do the king's bidding. Then he took her face and asked her to call him that after all. Karina was silent for a while. Then she called him by his name. The man moved closer to her and said that it really just sounded beautiful. Xavier also said that she could call him that when they were alone. The girl agreed, and then they almost kissed. But suddenly someone walked in on them. It was the servant. He coughed to get their attention and said that he was apologizing. His Highness Xavier immediately looked at him angrily and asked what was wrong. He stepped closer to him and spoke the whole situation in his ear. Xavier frowned and said he understood. Then he turned to Karina and said that he had some rather urgent business to attend to, so he had to leave. The girl, a little upset, asked if it was really true, but at that moment he kissed her gently on the forehead and said that they would meet tomorrow at the same place. The girl agreed and even blushed a little because of what had happened. Before he left, he also told her to never call him formally again from now on, or he would just punish her. When he left, Karina fell to the ground and blushed all over, for it was her very first kiss. Now she finally understood what true love was. She loved Xavier with all her soul and was ready to be by his side for the rest of her life. The butler in turn explained to Lauren the whole situation, that when they adopted Lady Karina, the Countess was very happy, and now she was over the moon. All because pretty soon they're going to marry Karina off to a member of the royal family. When Lauren heard that, she couldn't believe it was really true. The girl realized that now she would be finished. She returned home as darkness fell, and thought that somehow Karina and the Crown Prince had fallen in love. But she didn't understand how that was possible. Lauren didn't understand how she should be. After all, the heroine, who is the most important, violated the events of the novel. And now not only the ending will be different, but also Elon will never be able to see again. She didn't even know if he could even be healed without love. The girl walked back into the manor and didn't know how to face him now. As soon as she closed the door behind her, she saw a very sad Elon sitting there looking at her with a blank stare, asking if she had finally returned. The girl said in a trembling voice that that was right. She was already back. She came closer to him and asked him if he had gone to bed yet. The man, getting up from his chair, said that she had promised she would be gone for a while after all. So he decided to wait for her. Lauren in turn helped him and apologized, saying she'd just gotten lost on the way back. He wondered why she hadn't just taken the carriage. The girl said that of course she could not do that, because the money should be saved, and offered to escort him to the bedroom. The man did not mind, because he was really very tired, and it was quite hard for him to walk. When they arrived, she sat him on the bed and asked if he needed anything else. The man was silent. He thought for a while, and afterward Elon said he wished she would read something to him again. The girl was a little surprised and asked if he was having trouble sleeping again, and wondered if she should get a book too, like last time. He said he would like to hear the story again. As Lorena helped him into bed and changed into her home clothes, she picked up a book, sat down next to him in the chair, and began to tell the story. The girl had read that there were many people gathered in the populated wastelands. The number of soldiers in the enemy forces was equal. Palermo's infantry was 11,000, 5,000 cavalry. She read quite a few figures, still talking about how many cannons and artillery were mounted. But at that moment she suddenly fell silent, and he immediately sat down to see if she was all right. Of course he couldn't see and assumed that she had probably fallen asleep at a book because she was very tired from the day. Then he moved to his other side and lay down beside her. He thought that the sound of her breathing was quite pleasant and measured. At that moment, he remembered Lauren's words, saying that if they showed up at a women's dress store together, everyone would think they were a couple. Bernard, who was standing nearby, said that it was time to return to the manor after all, as he had spent too much time in her company. The man wondered why she hadn't brought him along, and assumed she was probably embarrassed to show up in places like this with him. Then he reached closer with his hand and suddenly felt himself touching some part of her body. He didn't know exactly what that part was. However, the man pulled his hand away rather quickly, realizing that you can't do that. In fact, even a simple touch requires great courage from Elon, and to her, he is just a blind man for whom she has become a guide. Sometimes he even feels like it's tearing him apart. He dropped his head straight down into the blanket, wondering if he could ever be with her at all. But at that moment she heard a knock on the door and immediately said that they could come in. However, he said it quietly enough so as not to wake the girl. And at that moment, Bernard came into the room, telling his lordship that he was at it again, seeing the girl beside him on the bed. The man, hearing the familiar voice, immediately wondered what he was even doing in his bedroom at such a late hour. Bernard came closer to him and said that he had, after all, asked him to bring him tea if the light was still on in the room. He put the cup on the small table and said that he was lucky that there were no other servants in the place. If word got out that a servant was sleeping in the master's room, they would be in big trouble. Bernard also said that he was also well aware that one should not do such a thing, and wondered why he didn't just make her his favorite. Then everything would be much easier and legal. When the gentleman heard, "That's you," he got very angry and asked what he was even saying. Bernard replied that she was only a servant without family, and for noble lords such servants were no more than slaves. Elon was incredibly angry. He waved his hand toward Bernard, the one from whom the voice had come, and told him to shut his mouth now and not to say such things again. Whatever he was to him, he would never forgive anyone like that again. Bernard apologized and said he understood and admitted that he had crossed the line. After that, he left the room and apologized again. Elon wondered how he could have suggested taking Lorena as his mistress in the first place. He reached his hand even closer and touched her fingers, which were slowly sleeping along with the rest of the girl's body. They sat like that for a while, and he thought about the fact that if things could really be worked out like that, life would be so much easier. At this time in the imperial palace, Xavier was sitting in his chambers sipping wine. A deputy came in to see him, and the man immediately looked at the elderly people who were only sitting on the floor and shivering with fear and asked, "Are these really the same people mentioned in the report?" The guy replied that everything was absolutely correct. Then the elderly couple immediately lowered their heads to the ground and said, "His Highness, to meet him is a great honor for us." He in his turn, turning to them, told them to raise their heads, for he wished to ask them a question. The elderly couple immediately looked up. Then Xavier handed them a single paper and said that he had heard rumors that they knew the woman. The man said in a trembling voice that everything was absolutely correct. They had seen her 6 months ago. The crown prince had asked where she was now. Well, the man said they didn't know that. After all, they pulled her out of the lake and let her stay with them for a few days. But she didn't stay long and went to the female Kruger. The crown prince wondered what happened next. The man replied that they had never seen her again. Then came the voice of one of the guards who had just brought them, and he said angrily that if they lied now, he would blow their heads off. They were immediately frightened and began to tremble, but said that they weren't lying at all. They wouldn't dare to speak untruths in front of the crown prince himself. Xavier in turn smiled and said that was enough in that case. They had helped him out contentedly anyway, and he also added that they could go now. Soon, when the man was alone with the knight, the latter in turn inquired how they would proceed. Xavier wondered, does he really need to explain every little thing? He thought it was pretty ordinary and understandable stuff. Then, without even turning to his assistant, he told the boy to do everything quietly. He bowed and said that everything would be done properly. Then Xavier thought about the fact that Alicia had survived after all. But this time, he would be sure to find her. Audrey is the name of the first ruler of the Empire of Constance, as well as a divine title of succession. According to legend, which has been passed down by word of mouth for centuries since the founding of the state, when the first emperor died, he ascended and became one of the gods. And then he said that from now on, in every generation of his descendants, a child would be born who looked like him. With this revelation, he simply left the human world. And when children with black hair and scarlet eyes were born into the ruling family, they were called the descendants of god Odar. However, they were not only distinguished by their appearance, their bodies exceeded human limits. They were skilled with swords, and they aged so slowly that it was hardly noticeable. But their most important and striking ability was that they were resistant to disease and poison. No one could have imagined that Elon, a descendant of Odar, would suffer such a terrible fate. When he was on the battlefield, he suddenly felt that there was some poison in the air. He immediately told his partners to be careful, but he suddenly felt something wrong with his eyes, and he realized that he stopped seeing and soon lost consciousness altogether. At first, there was no doubt that he would quickly recover. However, the guy tried all kinds of medicines and folk methods that were supposed to help him regain his sight. He even called healers, priests, and various shamans. However, no one was able to cure him. At one point, the guy realized he couldn't live like this anymore. He wanted to end his life, but he couldn't die. Bernard, his butler, tied him to the bed every night so that he wouldn't hurt himself in any way. And Elon even felt sorry for his faithful servant, who had traveled halfway around the world in search of a cure. But he didn't try to die anymore, and he didn't want to live any longer either. Then, various rumors began to spread in the capital once that a beast was howling terribly in the Duke's mansion every night. With such thoughts, Elon fell asleep, and in the morning, when he awoke, he didn't notice anything suspicious at first. He was more interested in how long he'd slept. He'd just fallen asleep, and he'd had that nightmare again. He couldn't feel Lorena's hands and feet on his body, and he couldn't see it, of course. The man got up from the bed and started fumbling with her body, thinking about the fact that she was probably still asleep. He thought it was cute, but he decided to wake her up. The guy said her name several times. Then Lorena started to open her eyes, asking, "Where are we?" But then, seeing this setting, she immediately realized she was in the Duke's room, and the Duke in turn smiled and wished her good morning. She immediately got out of bed and wished the gentleman a good morning too, and wondered how he had slept at all. Elon, frowning, said that he didn't really feel much for her since she was a contentedly restless sleeper. Lauren, in that case, said that she should have been woken up right away. The guy said he was the one who actually tried. However, she ended up just turning on her other side. The girl was too embarrassed about the whole thing and apologized to him. Lauren didn't understand how she'd even managed to fall asleep in the same bed with a man who already had a lover, even though she didn't know it yet. So the girl got out of bed and said that she would be on her way. But then suddenly Elon called her name and asked her to stop. Lauren turned in his direction and asked what was wrong and if he needed anything else. He, in turn, wondered what expression she had on her face at the moment. The girl was very surprised to hear this and asked what he meant. The man in turn said that he wanted to know if she was worried and if her cheeks were red with embarrassment. The girl realized at that moment that she was already incredibly embarrassed, and he also asked such questions. So she kept silent for a while, but Elon did not want to give up his request and asked her what kind of expression she had on her face. Then with a heavy sigh, she said that she was rather going for chocolate light for the moment, and after saying goodbye to him, told him that if he needed anything else, to just have him call her. When she closed the doors behind her, she felt too many emotions. Mostly it was anger. She was ready to bang her head against the wall and call herself an idiot. The girl didn't understand why she didn't just go back to her room. She knew that boys and girls should be kept away from each other from the age of 7. Even though she'd exhausted herself last night while she'd been looking for Karina, it still wasn't an excuse to stay in his bedroom. And then suddenly Lauren realized that she, for regret, had absolutely no time because Karina had already fallen in love with the Crown Prince, and the desired ending she would definitely not see. The girl thought she remembered everything correctly and knew that he was the second male character in the novella. From all the illustrations, it was as if he was shouting that he would end up with nothing. However, in the original, Karina didn't even pay attention to him, and Lauren assumed it was all because they had met earlier than they should have. However, the girl thinks that maybe if she sets her up with Elon right now, she can fix everything, because they are the main characters after all. There has to be some way out, and she wondered what was wrong with this Crown Prince. And then she remembered that in the plot of the novel, he was a secret villain. She thought about how she should have read the novella normally from the beginning instead of skipping around like this. Lauren was shocked that she somehow managed to forget about the secret villain. However, she did not remember what happened to him at all, but the girl decided to leave the prince aside for now. First, she needs to deal with Elon, and there, she thought, everything would sort itself out somehow. She was lucky that day, because Bernard had given her the day off to rest, and she went straight to the Earl of Harrington's waiting room to meet Karina. But, unfortunately, she was not without lies, of course, and she said that she had to go to the dress store because she had not bought anything that day. She was ashamed to deceive Bernard, but she had no other choice. At this moment, the girl suddenly heard the voice of the maid who said, "Miss, that they can handle it themselves." But Karina in turn said that there was nothing wrong with it. After all, she had carried the tray when she still lived in the village. The maid tried to insist, but it was no use. She took the tea tray in her hands and said she would take care of her guest herself, so they could do other things for the moment. Karina smiled afterward and, seeing the girl, asked if she had to wait long. Lauren, when she finally saw the protagonist, she couldn't find words for a while. But afterward she stood up and bowed and said that she thought the girl was surprised by her sudden visit. Karina, putting the kettle on the table, said that unconditionally. However, she was rather curious, for she said that she owed her, and at that moment sat down opposite her guest. Variant also took her seat and said that was all true, but the girl still didn't understand it at all and wondered why she thought she owed her. She poured herself some tea and said she only knew her name was Lorena, and the girl had come such a long way after all, and she couldn't remember her at all. The girl felt a little uneasy, and she wondered, perhaps then she can remember the fortune teller she met then in the square. Karina, thinking about it, then wondered if she knew her. The girl replied that she was her grandmother. In fact, Lauren was now just saying random things about a character she didn't even know. But Lauren kept lying, because apparently it worked, and said that Grandma had dementia and left the house a lot. People around her were always scared of her and didn't like her very much. However, the day before her death, she said that it was she, Miss Karina, who gave her 3 silver coins for her services. She, a kind soul, decided to predict her future as a reward, and told her that she would have a new life and a great and passionate love awaited ahead. With a tall, dark-haired man, she'd have that waiting for her. Lauren said that thanks to Karina's kindness, her grandmother passed away with a smile on her face. The girl, hearing this, was very much surprised, and also sympathized with her guest, for it was surely a bereavement. But Lauren suddenly smiled and said that until her very last breath she clutched those coins to her chest, and as a token of her gratitude, the girl would like to predict the future for her once again, and also, if it would not be to Karina's disadvantage, asked her for one favor. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised and wondered what she wanted. Lauren asked if she could meet one man, because it was a matter of life and death, and she had a chance to change someone's life again. A situation just like her grandmother's might happen. But then suddenly Karina lowered her head and apologized, but said she couldn't meet this person. The girl explained that she was engaged at the moment, and such a meeting would put her in a very awkward position. Lauren was very surprised to hear that she was engaged. "Well, Karina," she laughed and said, "that all is true, just as her grandmother predicted. He's tall and dark-haired, and she would certainly love to help her. But this engagement is not only important to her, so she doesn't want rumors to spread, because soon she may join the royal family, and that's very serious." Lauren immediately wondered if it was really true, and the girl suddenly became embarrassed and said it was a secret and asked that she not tell anyone else about it in that case. They were silent for a while, and then Karina said that she was actually dating the crown prince. She wondered if she was really in love with him, and thought that the rumors were true. And Karina answered her question by saying that she loves this man with all her heart, and really wants to get married. At that moment, Lauren realized that this was not a political marriage at all, and Karina was indeed in love with him with all her heart, and surely she could not afford to change her feelings for the good. But she didn't know how she was going to deal with Elon now, so she kept silent for a while, and then apologized and said she didn't know about the situation with Karina, and she was insanely embarrassed about it. She also asked that in that case, the mistress would still allow her to at least predict her future as a token of gratitude from her grandmother. Karina smiled and said that surely she could do it. Then Lauren pretended to tune in and said that she had a lot of things ahead of her. She was lying, of course, because she didn't have any magical powers at all. And so when evening came, Lauren left for her place, and Karina, left alone, went to the window and thought about those words of the girl. She realized that her words were very different from the prediction she had received earlier, and it was easy to believe the old woman's words. When she had first accompanied the Countess to the palace, it was just as she met him that Xavier noticed that she had dropped her handkerchief and immediately handed it to her. But he said it was rather strange. After all, he hadn't heard her name before, and he certainly wouldn't be able to forget the name of a girl so beautiful. Like her. Now Karina already doubted whether it was the same meeting, which was predetermined by fate. But in a flash, when she met him, that old woman's prediction immediately came to mind. She was interrupted by a maid who came to her and said that they had to go as soon as possible. The girl looked at her in surprise and asked, "What's wrong?" The maid explained that the crown prince had arrived to meet with her personally. Karina immediately ran to him, and when she saw the man, she asked why he had come to see her so suddenly. Smiling, he said that he was just tired of waiting for her visit to the palace, so he decided to take the initiative. Karina said that if she had known that he would decide to visit them, she would certainly have prepared herself. But now she had nothing prepared for his arrival at the palace. But the man said that he had already warned her that he would punish her every time she called him by his title. The girl was embarrassed and asked him what kind of punishment he was talking about, but at that moment he took her and kissed her, telling her that such would be his punishments if she did not abide by these rules. When Karina looked at him, she was very surprised, and he wondered, was it really so trivial of him to do such a trivial thing? But at that moment the girl remembered the words of the fortune teller. She said that the fruit of their love would be rejected by society at first. But there was no need to worry, for her child would rule the world. She also told Karina to listen to her heart, take whatever fate gives her, and if she pondered too long, she just might miss her chance. The fortune teller told the girl to just follow the call of her heart, and it would lead her to the best outcome of her life. So now Karina decided to seize her moment. She smiled and told Xavier that she was incredibly eager to be near him. The man wanted to kiss her again, and said that after these words he could not let her go anymore. Karina was finally convinced that this man was her destiny, so she said, smiling, that he didn't need to let her go. She thought, too, about not letting the words of that Lorena girl confuse her and lead her astray. Lorena was then told that she would have 2 men in her life, both from noble families, and if she sensed something amiss, she should not be afraid to go against her fate. That way she'll have absolutely everything. That the girl would only live. At this moment, Karina thought about the fact that even if Xavier has some rival, she will definitely not look at him. And at that moment, the young couple started kissing. At this point, Elon went with Bernard to a jewelry store, and the woman said there was no girl named Lorena on their customer list. Then the man turned to his assistant and asked, "Are there any other ladies' clothing stores nearby?" Bernard sighed heavily and said, "Not at all. This is the only store." At this point, Elon was horrified. He couldn't believe that the girl had really lied to him,